Hi everyone, welcome to the Hwæt, Exploring Old English podcast. On this show, curious high school students have conversations regarding Old English language and culture, with both each other and experts. I'm Marco.
And I'm Nat. This podcast is actually a re-upload from a few months ago, but we found it to be an inspiring and thorough conversation that would do well as an episode.
I'm super excited for this one. Today we had the wonderful opportunity to speak with the legendary Dr. Robert Fulk.
Yeah, this guy is kind of a big deal. Dr. Fulk has been cited as the greatest Old English philologist to emerge during the 20th century, and has published a plethora of research regarding the cultural, grammatic, linguistic, religious, and pragmatic aspects of Old English. He has also won a great many awards and recognitions, and has truly revolutionized the field of Anglo-Saxon study.
In our Old English club at the high school, we studied his wonderful introductory grammar to Old English. We loved it, so we reached out to him hopeful we could meet and discuss his magnificent work and experience.
And to our delight, he agreed. Without further ado, let us begin our conversation with the lionized Dr. Robert Fulk.
How did you get interested in Old English?
Well, so we've been Marco and I, co-founders, we've been dabbling with this idea of an Old English club since 8th grade, and finally, well, so we wanted to learn some sort of dead language, but like Latin, I guess, seemed too standard. So we were looking through sort of the early Germanic languages, and well, we found Old English, and then we found this lovely website. I think it was created through University of Oxford, and it had all these resources, and we started to learn and really got into it. And from there, we founded this club, and it's been going great.
Wonderful.
So my question is, based off of the evolution from Old English to modern English, how do you predict like what English will be like in 100 years? Like, will we still be able to understand it?
It's always hard to predict which way a language will go. But if you look at what's presently happening in the language, English is becoming even more idiomatic than it has been for quite a while. And I think there'll be a lot of neologisms that will crop up that you wouldn't understand them if you heard them today.
Right.
That is one of the hardest things for non-native speakers to pick up about English. That is all the idioms in the language. And I suspect that's what's going to happen to the language. I don't expect any major sound shifts, for instance.
How did you develop an interest in medieval language and Old English, and how has your understanding changed over the years?
Well, I was in the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I already knew something about the Romance side of the English language, but I didn't know much about the Germanic side of the language, and I thought it would make me a better writer to know something about the Germanic side of the language. So I took a course in Old English from a linguist at the University of Iowa. And that got me interested in linguistics on the one hand and medievalism on the other hand. Pursuing that seemed like a way to combine my interest in literature with my growing interest in linguistics. And that's how I got interested in Old English, Old and Middle English to begin with.
And how long have you been teaching for?
I no longer teach. I've been retired for 8 years now, but I taught for 34 years here at Indiana.
Wow.
And I taught for 1 year before that at Wabash College here in Indiana.
Wow.
And before that, I was I taught classes as a graduate student at the University of Iowa.
Kind of on that note, you've had a lot of publications. So, and kind of looking through them, we were wondering how you think you personally have sort of shifted the study of Old English, and how you think you've influenced the field.
Well, in most of my work, what I've been primarily concerned with, most of my published books, I should say, what I've primarily been concerned with is ensuring that future generations can continue to study the things that have fascinated me in my academic career.
Yeah.
That's why, for instance, I wrote that introductory grammar of Old English. I wrote, I finished a formal grammar of Old English that was started by my good friend Richard Hogg, and he completed the first volume of a 2-volume grammar of Old English. It's not a learner's grammar; it's a reference grammar. But he died suddenly in the middle of compiling the second volume.
Oh my.
And
Okay.
and so I completed that for him. I also I used to teach a course in the Middle English language to graduate students, and I used a book that was originally published in French, and was translated called a Handbook of Old English, and it was a very good grammar, and I liked using it in my classroom, but it was getting too old. There's been a lot of work done on Middle English in the past half century, especially at the University of Edinburgh, where they have compiled a linguistic atlas of medieval English.
Yeah.
And that has made it much easier for us to identify the dialect features of Middle English texts. I don't know whether you've ever looked at Middle English, but one of the fascinating things about Middle English is that there are so many different dialects of Middle English. It's true that there's more than one dialect in Old English, but Old English is much more homogeneous than Middle English is, and part of that is for social reasons. You know that after the Norman conquest, the Anglo-Saxon nobility were replaced by French speakers, and consequently English became like a secondary language in its own country. And since there was no real central standard, all these different dialects were able to develop. It makes Middle English fascinating to study. At any rate, we've made such firm advances in the study of Middle English dialects that I thought it would really be helpful if we had a Middle English grammar for beginners that showed them how to identify Middle English dialects according to modern principles instead of the old principles that were used in the book I was using at the time. And that's what got me to compile that Middle English grammar. And then, of course, I think probably what most people think of when they think of my work is the edition of Beowulf, which I compiled with Bob Bjork and Jack Niles. The standard edition of Beowulf for more than half a century, really closer to a century, has been Frederick Kleber's Beowulf. And Kleber died in the 1950s, so that the latest edition of his recension of Beowulf was published in 1950. And that obviously was getting quite old, and it needed to be updated. And so that's what we did. I think you get the idea then of what's been the motivating principle in the books I published. That is that I've wanted to make sure that the things I have studied in my lifetime continue to be useful to people who want to study those things.
Oh yeah, so we've been talking about Old English culture a lot. Like we learned about, I remember on Christmas we learned about some of their holiday traditions. And so how did some of the cultural and historical context of the period shape the language and the literature found?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer it. We know very little about, for instance, the religion of the Anglo-Saxons before they were converted to Christianity. Most of what we know about Germanic religion before conversion to Christianity comes from old Icelandic records. You have probably heard of the Poetic Edda, and Snorra Edda, which is a prose account of some of the religious beliefs, the myths and the legends of the ancient Germanic peoples. We can't be certain that the things we find in the old Icelandic records are the same things that the Anglo-Saxons believed, but at least we know there's some overlap. So for instance, the chief god in Old Icelandic is named Odin, and there is and his counterpart in pre-Christian England was named Woden. And those two words are cognate with each other. They mean crazy, because I actually the way it's usually explained is that Odin, as a war god, worked himself up into a frenzy, and that's why he was supposedly crazy. You probably know the word berserk. That's also an old Icelandic word. It literally means bear shirt. These berserkers would put animal skins on and go into battle crazy. Our Wednesday is named after Woden.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes, Tuesday is named after an earlier war god named Tiw. Thursday, of course, is named after the equivalent of Thor. His name in Old English was Thunor, which becomes thunder in modern English. And Friday is named after Freyja. She is considered the equivalent of Venus, the love goddess. And of course, in the Romance languages, Friday is named after Venus. For instance, in French, it's vendredi.
So when learning Old English, what are some of like the major challenges that you often see your students facing, and do you have any like tips or strategies for overcoming that?
Yes, I think it's hard for speakers of modern English to understand how important it is to have command of the grammar of Old English, specifically the endings on nouns and adjectives and verbs. It's just extremely important. You know, in order to understand a text, it's just extremely important to be able to know what an ending on a word signifies. And this becomes all the more important when you start to study poetry, because in prose, the word order is generally going to be fairly predictable. But in poetry, the word order can be quite convoluted, and then you have to be able to match endings in order to understand which words go together. And this is not true. This is true not just of Old English, but of all inflected languages, you know, like Latin. You just need to be able to understand the grammar in order to study texts intensively. And I think that's the hardest thing for English speakers to overcome, because in English, we have very few inflections like that on words, and we tend to rely instead on word order.
Or in terms of learning words, do you have any sort of recommendations for like dictionaries? Sometimes we found it a little difficult to find good resources for just like sheer vocabulary.
Have you looked at the website that the URL for it is given on the last page of my introductory grammar? You'll find all kinds of information in there. You know, information about dictionaries, about major editions of Old English texts, and all other kinds of resources. I think maybe the best dictionary for beginners is one by John Clark Hall. I believe there is an earlier edition of this dictionary available freely on the web. But if you look at the URL there in my introductory grammar, if you look at that website, I think you'll find that helpful.
When a lot of us here have read like big
epics like the Odyssey, which were originally in ancient Greek, and then when you translate it, it kind of loses some of its poetic sort of like sound. So when you've translated Beowulf or and many texts, when you translate, do you ever try to like keep some of that poetic sound? How do you go about preserving that like beauty that was in the original language?
Yes, I do sometimes when I translate. I don't do a lot of translation from Old English, but I've published a couple of books. When I translated Beowulf for the Dumbarton Oaks Medieval Library, in many places I tried to retain the alliteration in some passages. I don't know whether have you studied any Old English poetry yet?
We looked at like Cade Mom's Hymn,
Yes.
Waldera,
Yes. Yes.
and then Beowulf. We've looked at those.
So you know what the poetic features are of Old English poetry. It's especially the alliteration that binds the two halves of the line together. There's also a meter, which is kind of difficult to explain, and some poets, some translators have in fact tried to reproduce the poetic meter in their translations, but I don't think it works for modern English speakers because the principles of Old English meter are very different from the principles of modern English meter. And so we don't intuitively understand it the way Anglo-Saxons would have.
Thank you so much for listening to today's epic conversation with Dr. Robert Fulk. I personally was super inspired. This guy's dedicated so much of his life to Old English study and has done so much to advance the field.
Yeah, I hope we can talk with him again. If you enjoyed this conversation too, please leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It truly helps us reach more people and grow our mission. If you have any questions or remarks, please leave them in the comments section below.
Until next time.